All right, in this installment of Liberty Music, talking to a very special guest and has some very interesting gigs coming up. Mike Watt and the Missingmen, and there's a big tour coming and rolling through my neck of the woods of the Horseshoe Tavern, Toronto, Ontario, Saturday, October 5th. And I've got Mike Watt on the show today. How's it going, Mike?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, good to be talking to you, no doubt, man. And it seems like you're keeping busy and everything like that. Like round one, first of the series of projected releases from the latest collaboration that you've got going on. So for the listeners who are kind of unfamiliar, can you maybe talk a bit about that?
I think you're referring to the jump-started Plowhards.
Indeed, I am.
Yeah, that's with Time Conjolier. There was a scene, well, in the Minutemen days, the only punk rockers in Pedro was pretty much us. But by the 90s, there was people actually moving to Pedro to get into a music scene. And Todd Conjolier was one of these guys. He came from Torrance, a couple towns over. And this was in the 90s. There was a couple of houses next to each other on 4th Street at Gaffey. They called it Porch Core, and they were actually having gigs in the living room and stuff, touring bands. And then Todd started his label, Recess Records. Guess he was a skater when he was younger, and then he quit that to do music. Well, that's actually the scene I ended up getting my Missingmen drummer, Raul Morales, because I was touring so much, Dylan, I didn't even know this was happening. Anyway, well, we're 20 years later, right? And I do a tour with the Missingmen and Toys That Kill, which is a Todd Conjolier band. And it was the I-5, just the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington State. And I'd have them come play with this old Blue Oyster Cult song me and D. Boone used to do. And I don't know, I thought, because, ever since D. Boone days, I've used the bass as a composition tool. Of course, we grew up together. I didn't have to show him anything, or he didn't have to show me, just start playing. But after I lost him, it's a lot, I still a little sometimes did guitar composition, but mainly on the bass, and it was kind of interesting to see how people would respond with it. People like Nels Cline loved it, because he's into improv, and so I just thought, I wonder what Todd would do with something like this. Because he's got a lot of projects too. But what if some guy wrote him 15 songs that was just bass and asked him to play guitar and sing all over it? The only stipulation I made was I'd like you to find a different drummer for each tune. And so in a way, even though, I wrote the whole songs, verse, chorus, bridge, intro, outro, all that stuff, I still didn't have them fully realized, because I think with the bass guitar, there's not as much harmonic content as maybe a guitar or a keyboard. And so it leaves a lot of room for interpretation by your collaborator. And so, jumpstart is a slang over here, like if your car battery goes dead, you use your buddies, right? And a plow hard, well, that's a guy you just point in the right direction. A plow is to dig up the earth so you can plant. So you just point it in the right direction, and they go for it. So that's where I came up with this thought. And man, Todd, he went for it. And I was really surprised and pleased with what he did. And I just, last night, finished making parts of, he's doing a video for every tune on the first release. And we plan on doing 5 of these. So I told him, after 40 tunes, okay, we'll do a gig. Because by then, I think this project will have an identity of its own. So that's basically where it came from and where it's at.
That's cool with the different drummers on the different tracks, though, man. I'm digging that. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of when you had that solo project back in the day, Ball Hog or Tugboat. Just in the sense of you bring in different guests to kind of add unique touches to the different tracks. Is that something you really like doing? Do you think just having these different musicians adds these different flavors and textures to it, as opposed to just having one player kind of perform all the parts?
Well, Dylan, that's funny because they call that my solo album, but there was 48 dudes on it.
Yeah, right.
But I think it's kind of particular to the instrument. The bass is kind of like glue. And if you ain't got stuff to stick to, you're just a puddle, you know. So you need the other cats. I didn't want a whole bunch of different singers and a bunch of guitar players. I wanted Todd to take on all that stuff. So in a way, I wanted it both ways. I wanted, all the drummers be different, and that'd be his decision. And that, in fact, he would be directing them. He'd be the producer, right? See, in a way, the way I looked at my contribution to the project was instead realized.
If you could sort of recap what you were saying about the Wattplower and just sort of how it's been, received and everything like that.
Yeah, you're right. Last time we were talking, it was still kind of in the prototype phase, and when we did bring it out, people liked it. I maybe 7, 8 prototype. Actually, we're working on a Mark II right now. That's what I'll be playing on tour. If you come to the Horseshoe Tavern gig, you'll see me with this prototype for the Mark II, which has got a couple more pickups to give a little more vocabulary. But, I just felt like if my name was going to be on it, it'd have to be something that I would play. And so, I just kept asking them to make changes, and they're such good people that I thought they were going to go, man, this guy's a picky asshole. But and give up on me, but they didn't. They stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a great instrument. People very much, seem to be digging it and everything like that. Just like a, big fire up all around. So great that the Wattplower is being well received. But it seems like you're still going, pretty steady with the Watt from Pedro show and everything like that. Which, definitely.
Pedro show, 18 years now.
Yeah. I saw you had.
Over 600 shows. They're all archived at twfps.com. I did one a couple days ago with a cat from Pennsylvania, Ian Everett, and the project did with Mickey from the Ween guys, called Bronze, Solid Bronze. Strange thing, but here's a bass player. This idea of bass players, being the starter, the jump starter, instead of the last thing you put on. That's kind of a newer thing. And especially his composition. When Charles Mingus wrote songs, he wrote them on the piano. He didn't write on the bass. The idea of writing songs of bass, I think it's kind of a newer thing. But I'm into it.
Yeah, for sure, man. And it seems like the kayaking has been a big thing for you. Is that still something you're keeping up with a fair bit?
Oh, yeah, paddling. Because, I got a bad knee. But it doesn't matter in the kayak. I'm my own engine room. It's all above the waist stuff. And there's something about being at sea, too. It's a trippy feel. It's a trippy connect compared to all the other ways you connect in your life. There's something about, having the paddle in your hand, and it's very quiet. There's pelicans, there's dolphins, there's sea lions, there's idiots with boats to try to put wakes on you. It's a trippy thing, especially if you live by the water too. How retarded not to do something like that.
Yeah, and it seems like it informs the songwriting to a degree in a way, just and as far as kayaking being some endeavor where you kind of have to undulate with the grooves of the water and kind of keep yourself going and moving.
Yeah. If you hold on to the paddle, it's kind of a balance bar. So, but you do have to keep your nerve, because sometimes the ocean will lift you 20, 30 feet. You can't freak out, But there are certain rhythms. Actually, I got a shorter one. It's only 9 footers, so you got to keep the momentum up, or you get dead in the water, and you have to start it. So it's once I start, I don't stop for 2 hours. It's kind of the motion is kind of like boxing. Your arms, it's kind of a figure 8 mixed with boxing. It's a really trippy thing. I started in the early 2000s, and my pop was a sailor, and he was an engine room guy. And I just thought about, in a kayak, you're your own engine room. And that's how I got into it. Also, I got bad knees, and it was just killing me to use the bicycle or hobbling every day. So
got that like DIY.
As you're less younger.
Yeah, it's got that like DIY punk ethos of the Minutemen, and as far as like the whole be your own engine kind of mentality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Pragmatic philosophy.
But it seems like you're steady touring a fair bit. I understand you just got off like a recent touring cycle with Flipper and everything like that, and you were kind of like just recapping certain like instances like you jam with the band like in years prior and stuff like that. So how important is that band to just like what you've been able to do with music?
Yeah, Flipper. Minutemen opened for them 38 years ago. Never would have imagined I would be playing bass for them. Great guys. That was a really interesting tour. It was overseas in Europe. And, the bass part's pretty iconic. I even used a fuzz pedal, which is kind of different for me. And just Ted and Steve and David Yao was singing. It was really interesting tour. There's a lot of different ways to do music, but given the direction, taking the direction, but the collaboration, like with Todd, but even taking the direction like with Flipper, where you replace the dead guy, right? You do old songs. Or I did it for 125 months with the Stooges. In fact, I think the last time I played in Toronto was in Stooges, at maybe Fort York or something. There was a riot fest there.
Oh, okay, right on.
Yeah, so it's been a while. I'm sorry to everybody in Toronto for not playing, because I played the Horseshoe Tavern many times, but it's been a little bit.
Yeah, it'll be great having you back there. I actually saw a buddy's band play there a little while ago, and then I saw that your gig was coming up shortly after Howard kind of reached out to me. So yeah, I think that venue would lend itself well to like the sound you bring to it. I'm sure it's going to be a rocking time, man.
Yeah. Interesting thing, you're going to notice that the drummer is a couple of months short of 40 years younger than me. The original Missingmen drummer, Raul Morales, in Paloma, had a daughter, so he can't really tour. So, me, D. Boone, and Georgie went to high school with this guy's dad, class of 76, San Pedro High, That's something I would have never planned. In the older days, you didn't play with people out of your age thing. But these days, they're not all bad days. A lot of younger people, they're very hip. I think there's less of a divide than in the older days.
Yeah, and it also speaks to how music can be so influential to, generations of people who like weren't even really around like when the scene was, I guess, at its like the height of its powers, or like the most like vibrant, just in the sense of like the moment is like occurring in real time. Like people can check out the records years later and there's still that sense of vibrancy in the music. So that's a cool thing. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, but they used to always sell rock and roll as a young person's music.
Yeah.
But we got Rolling Stones that are in the 70s. So maybe that doesn't really make sense anymore. So I saw some of this when Raymond Pettibone used to take me to these old jazz guys gigs in the 80s, Elvin Jones, Mr. Ray Brown, Max Roach, and they were always playing with younger people. But maybe it's time in rock and roll, like you said, if you still got the vibrancy, why not? And I never had kids. In a way, this is a way of me handing down stuff, maybe. 45 gigs in 45 days, he's going to learn at least one way to tour.
Yeah, and a good shout out to Raymond Pettibone for sure. Bonding over jazz music and 80s pro wrestling. It's a good friendship to have.
Yeah, he's a beautiful guy. I've learned a lot from him, going way back. I've been very lucky in this whole music thing, expression thing, about people I've met. Tom Watson, the guy who's going to be on guitar, it's 20 years now I've been playing with him.
Yeah, you've created some good relationships.
Like this, 20 years. Well,
is it a strange dynamic? Because you mentioned like talking about how like you have like a drummer who's like a fair bit younger than you, and like you've also mentioned playing with the Stooges and stuff like that, which I presume is like an iconic kind of thing. Like, oh wow, it'd be neat to play with those guys someday, with that kind of sentiment. Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering though is like,
yeah, that was very interesting. I never had older brothers or knew older guys like that. That was a trippy thing. They were all 10, 11 years older than me, and I'd never been in that situation. And then the other thing is, I love Stooges music. You couldn't believe what that kind of experience that was for me, Dylan. It was incredible.
I guess what I'm wondering though, is it like a strange kind of thing for you for maybe like younger musicians to like kind of perceive you in a similar light, and as far as like, oh, this is great music, would love to, jam with Mike Watt. Do you think of it on that level or not so much? Is it like a flattering thing? Is it kind of strange?
Like, because when I was a younger man, music was more divided up like that. Like, we didn't listen to Little Richard. We're in the 70s, right? We listened to T-Rex. We listened to Blue Oyster Cult. We don't listen to Little Richard. Why? You know why? There's some, like, expiration date. The 70s people were... I was 13 in 1970, so I grew up in the 70s. And it was kind of a narcissist period. I think that people are more open-minded. You could talk to a young man in his 20s now. He knows about music 30 years before he was born. He has no problem, right? Black Sabbath, how old are they? 50 years or something? That never happened when I was a teenager. So I think we've made some progress on that front.
Yeah, for sure.
It does make me trip because I remember when I was a kid, that shit wouldn't happen. But I am glad that it did.
Yeah, for sure. And I was noticing that one of the descriptors you use to describe a rough tour is a hell ride. What's the term used to describe a good tour?
Well, a hell ride, like for example, Salt Lake City to Denver, that's going to be 500 miles. But it's just the way the geography is, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it's worth it, it's a good gig. So hell rides ain't total torture. It's just sometimes you got to put in a little more duty to make the thing happen, just because of the situation,
Yeah, for sure.
You're up there a little north, and sometimes you get a storm, right? The weather isn't the most calm, but you don't let that stop everything, right?
Oh, definitely not. No.
Yeah, you guys, True North, man, you guys are the champs as far as Ironmen with the weather. Last spring I played up in Edmonton. These cats had me come up there with my Missingmen. And it was 168. The sun had come out. It was 168 days since the sun had last come out when I got there. I brought some from California for them. And their nickname for that town is Dirt City. And I'm thinking, man, these are the toughest men on the planet, man. But you get dealt a hand and you play the best you want. So hell riding ain't supposed to be totally negative. It's just kind of describing a little work you got to do.
Yeah, some bumps in the road sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to let it totally, turn you away. It's going to be a little tough, but you're going to do it.
And I guess with like this project you have here, like the latest group, like I'm wondering, like with the different drummers on each track, like what the, I guess, selection process is like. Is it like both you and your bandmate kind of like figure out who you both kind of dig having on certain tracks? Is it kind of like, oh, I'll pick a drummer for this track, maybe you pick a drummer for this one? Like, what's that like?
I put it totally in the Todd Conjulier's hands. I said, here's the songs, and you play guitar and sing on them. One thing I ask of you, pick a different drummer for each. So I let it go, like maybe we got cut off, but I was looking at the songs I wrote them. It's not finished products. They're more like springboards, more like launch pads. That's where it's different than Ball Hogger Tugboat. Ball Hogger Tugboat was like, you know what? Here's the theory. If a bass player knows the song, anybody can come in and play guitar and drums and sing. This project was like, okay, I'm going to build you a launch pad, Todd, and we're going to take that satellite. So a little different, but kind of working with the same format.
Yeah, absolutely. And like this tour you've got coming up, you got like quite a few dates. Are there any venues along the tour that you're looking forward to getting back to? Like, is it a similar kind of dynamic to like the fact that you haven't been to maybe Toronto for a few years? Like, are there other similar dates in that sense? Like, oh yeah, coming back here after X amount of years.
Absolutely. And also, actually, the Missingmen ain't toured for 4 or 5 years, except for that West Coast thing with Todd. So just getting the Missingmen back out there, and it's good prac because when we come back, we're recording a new Missingmen album. So it's also good prac. But there's been a lot of new pads that have opened up that I'm going to play for the first time. Of course, some old pads like 7th Street Entry in Minneapolis. I've been playing there since the early 80s. You know? But then the brand new things like in Somerville, in the Boston area. And there's a new pad in Philadelphia. Boot and Saddle, you know. So it's a mix of new and old. But it's 45 gigs in 45 days. It's why getting back to I learned with the Minutemen, you know, what Black Flag taught us. When you ain't playing, you're paying. I actually think that goes back to vaudeville.
Yeah, I mean it's a good mentality to have, just like, you know, getting your reps in, so to say, or to like make a boxing analogy, you know, like getting in the jump rope in, getting in the bag work going.
Yeah, and you know, if you think about vaudeville, I mean, this was a time without television or radio, movies. So guys actually had to work the towns. They had to come to your town. I like being part of that tradition. It's not totally old-fashioned. Sure, I can make walk from Pedro show from Pedro here, and there's something about getting in the boat in the Econo line, which, by the way, they were made in Canada, you know. Anyway, I get in there, and I actually go to their town. I eat their chow. I conquer their pads, you know. There's something about that. It's kind of like a little bit, I remember reading Don Quixote, you know, and Sally Forth killed at some windmills.
Yeah, for sure, no doubt. And
you know, if there's nothing like it, they're really touring is a trippy thing.
And that's kind of like the interesting dynamic with a lot of music nowadays. As much as music is like so easily accessible on a digital level, I think there's that almost extra onus on people to like want to go to live shows and stuff like that and kind of check them out. I think it bolsters the curiosity that much further for certain music fans.
Well, you know, I'm going to agree with that. I'm totally going to agree with that. I think that's an excellent theory. Yeah, because you know what? Sometimes I tell you, the worst thing to hear from a younger person is everything's been done. Because you want to tell them, no, man. Or they'll say this: I was born in the wrong time.
Oh yeah,
no, man, you're born when you're born.
Yeah. Oh, that's a bit. Yeah, it's a big pet peeve of mine for sure, man. You gotta have that mindset more like tobacco, right? Like have like a unique sort of sound.
Tobacco.
When are we gonna get the Mike Watt tobacco collab? Are you ever gonna collab with tobacco down the line, you think, or?
Well, you know, I've done a couple. Tom Feck out of Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a thing with him, me, Flea, and Kay. And then I did a thing with just me and him, a song called Black Yogurt. And maybe he was called a Black Mountain Super Rainbow then.
Yeah.
He goes between different names. But, yeah, I love that guy's work.
Yeah, and I like your progressive kind of stuff you do. Like when you...
Big inspiration to me.
Yeah, you collab with...
You know, he's got a soul that's older than mine. Even though, yeah, chronologically he's a little bit younger. But, man, that cat is hip to a lot of stuff, man. He's very cool people.
And some of the guys you jammed with, too, like Cedric from Mars Volta and Paul Masvidal from Cynic and certain guys like that. Is there any, like, you know, progressive music? Like,
I got to tell you, Dylan, when I did that, I didn't know who the drummer was. You know, this is one of the great things about the internet. You can collaborate with people, right, without being there. In fact, I've made whole albums. There's a guy in Montreal. What's his name? Steve. Yeah, you know, never even met these guys. And when I did that, I think the project was called Anywhere. And it was actually a drummer man who wanted to play 12-string guitar. He said, yeah, I had somebody else do the drums, but will you do the bass? What? I did it. And I found out the drummer man was Cedric. I didn't even know it at the time.
It must be easier doing the email thing as opposed to like when you were like mailing the 4 tracks to Kira back before that first Dose project.
Yeah, and yeah. For one thing, the time lag. Also, not as good a fidelity. But you know what? The ethic is the same. The ethic is the same. We're not going to let distance get in the way of us trying to do a proj. So in the way that those trading cassette, those things had to happen, you know. Thank God it didn't stay there. You know, we could move on to trading files. But I think that's where those, because ethics are strong. If you ask me, having your own website is the same ethic as putting out your own fanzine. Okay, we don't go to the Kinkos. We go to the GoDaddy, right? But that's the same thing. You don't put a middleman between you and your expression. So sometimes, yeah, the technology ain't caught up, but the idea's there. So what me and Kay were doing with the Dose Proj trading capes is kind of what I did. But with the trippy thing about with Cedric, I didn't know it was Cedric, but, you know, I was doing my best to play with him. And then when I found out it was him, it was like, well, I didn't even know he was a drummer. You know, I was really happily surprised. That was there's good stuff like that, you know, that can happen when you ain't afraid to let the freak flag fly.
Yeah, you got to keep jamming Econo and flying your flannel, man. But is there anything you want to add as a parting thought as we're kind of wrapping things up here? You've been great with your time.
Okay, I'll tell you, I heard that No Means No broke up.
That's terrible.
Bad thing. Yeah, I heard the Wright brothers ain't going to do it anymore. And man, those cats, us Minutemen were really big fans, you know, inspired by them. So I always think of Rob and John and, you know, Mr. Wrong. And even that trippy thing they had, the Hanson brothers.
Oh, that's a great shout out too. I almost forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, remember that? They did that also.
Instead of like my war.
I heard he's been running for government and stuff. I just think it's interesting times that people from old days don't have to just belong in the old days. So I'm really grateful for cats in these days being open-minded and give us a shot. And so I come to the Horseshoe. I promise to play with all my heart. The big man on the drums, Tom Watson, and connect, with the big town from True North.
Yeah, it's going to be a great show Saturday, October 5th.
Great stuff, Dylan. Usually I get asked the same old.
Oh, well, I mean, I love having you on, man. I mean, you've done a lot of really interesting stuff, and I mean, you continue to do a lot of really interesting stuff, so it's cool to follow along with, and people should be following along with Mike Watt and the Missingmen, going to be touring all around North America, and the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, Ontario, one of those stops, Saturday, October 5th. And again, thanks so much for the time, Mike. Hopefully we can get some more interviews going on in the future, man. Always a pleasure.
You know it, because I've got a lot more projects coming up, Dylan.
Yeah, you're going to keep jamming Econo, I'm sure, and keeping her rolling, man. So I look forward to the next time we talk.
Okay, I keep pushing. Thanks again.